Hey, thanks for joining us on the From the Bench podcast presented by Projectile Warehouse. I'm your host, Taylor Weezy, and this podcast is going to revolve around phone calls that you might make from your reloading bench to fellow reloaders and experts in the field. Today's episode is going to be with Mr. Simon Plush, or Plushy as he's more affectionately known. He has been reloading for years, shot a lot of F-class, shot a lot of PRS, and he's a regular front runner at club matches here at Monado. He's achieved a lot, so this is going to be exciting to hear what he's got to say about his process and about what rifles he's working on at the moment.
Hey, you got me?
Hey, Plushy, how are you, mate?
Good, buddy. How's it going?
Yeah, good, dude. Thanks for jumping on tonight, mate. It sounds to me, and from what I know, you're flat out in the reloading room getting ready for tomorrow.
Yeah, I've had a busy week, mate, and I'm hopelessly underprepared, so I'm going to sit here and reload some rounds as I'm talking to you.
Perfect, mate. It is called From the Bench podcast, so we're not telling any lies. At least one of us is on the bench, and I was on the bench about half an hour ago. So
nice, happy to oblige.
Yeah. What you're shooting tomorrow, Centerfire at Monado, a club PRS match, same match I'm shooting?
That's the one, mate.
Nice. I believe you got a sneaky win at the first club match, so we might have to hunt you down a little bit tomorrow.
I'd call it a surprising win because I shot terribly.
I think everybody felt like they shot that match terribly. Like Travie put together quite a tricky course of fire. There was so many positional movements in each stage. I think everyone felt like they did crap, and then we read the scores at the end of the day, and everyone was like, "Oh, I did a little bit better than I thought."
Yeah, 100%. I was genuinely surprised because, like, you know, I guess I was the least bad person on the day.
Yeah,
is one way to look at it. But you're right. Travie's done a good job of that, and the other person that's done a really good job of that in recent times is Rusty, throwing in stages at club and matches where you really have to think on your feet to get through the stage and even get into the right positions, making challenging positions. Not so much from a physical point of view, from a mental point of view. You've got a mental checklist. You've got to run. Have I achieved the criteria where I'm even allowed to take a shot? I'm really looking forward to seeing how the practical shooting club members go on the national scene, because it really gets the gears grinding when you're under pressure. Yeah, that's what PRS is all about. So I reckon it's going to go well.
Yeah, totally. And I think that from what I've seen being at the club, the short amount of time I've been there, I've noticed that's like one thing where you thrive is those mental mistakes. I'm pretty happy with all the shots I break, and my hit percentage is pretty high, but I forget my course of fire, or I fumble a position and make a mistake transitioning to, a different target or something. And I think that can be the real, breaker in PRS style shooting. But that's why we love it. And I'd rather a really challenging match than a absolute, meatball one where you're just hitting everything.
Completely agree. My favourite PRS match, I don't know how many of our national level matches, I've only shot 4, I think. My favourite one was the finale last year because it was particularly difficult, and you could have a bad stage and get a 2 or a 0. I don't think I got any zeros in the finale, but I got a couple of 2s. And then you weren't done. You could really knuckle down and focus and shoot well over the next half a dozen stages and potentially catch the points up. Mm-hmm. Those matches where you drop 2 points and you're done because everyone else is not dropping 2 points. They're not the ones that I enjoy the most.
No, definitely not. How did you go at the finale last year? The year before? What were your sort of national level results? What was the best finish you had?
I reckon. What did I have? I had a bad start to the year, and then sort of mid-year or maybe later in the year, everything sort of started to click for me. Where did I go? I'll run you through the year. I think I shot the Monado Meltdown. The first one in Monado was my first PRS shoot. I didn't do particularly well. I think I finished about 30th, something like that. That was my first match, and nerves got the better of me, to be honest. I had a bit of a niggling back injury, which wasn't helping, but it was more nerves than back injury, I can tell you that. And then I shot Little River over in, was that just out of Geelong over in Victoria? Similar, maybe a little bit better, maybe mid-20s. That was a particularly tough match because it rained the whole bloody time. It was just miserable. It was very miserable. Then I went over to Buchan. I think I finished 8th in Buchan. It started to click for me a little bit there. And then finale was my fourth match of the year, and I reckon I finished 9th or 10th or something like that in Open.
Awesome.
So that's
pretty quickly into the top 10 on a national scene, and you won a club series at Monado that year as well, correct?
Yeah, I did.
That's pretty impressive results, and everyone that I speak to and ask, hey, who's someone you'd like me to get on the podcast, I've had quite a few people say to me, get Plushy on, we'd love to hear about Plushy's process and some things from you about reloading. So they obviously respect you as a shooter and as well as a reloader. And I think a lot of that maybe comes from your past, right? You shot F-class and a whole heap of other disciplines. So you've obviously been reloading ammo for quite a long time, and maybe at a level that was, more important to have those reloading techniques down pat than what we even do for the PRS thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's just because I love buying expensive toys, to be honest. Makes life a bit easier. Look, I shot F-class for a bit, and that's all about accuracy. Accuracy and wind reading are really the two major points there. And that was something that transitioned into PRS shooting pretty well for me. Is you don't need the level of accuracy for PRS that we shoot in Australia that you do for F-class. So it was an opportunity I brought over some things that work. There's some things that don't work, which we can talk about a bit later if you want. That the F-class guys do that we don't, or we shouldn't. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a fun and interesting sort of transition from doing that. That's some competition shooting I've done. I've done a fair bit of spotlighting and stuff like that before, but F-class was my first jump into proper competition shooting.
Yeah. What would be your accuracy requirements that differ between the two, sort of like group sizes and maybe standard deviation and extreme spread numbers? What are you looking for F-class versus your PRS setup that you'd be happy with?
So F-class is probably a quarter-minute gun at distance at 900 metres at a kilometre. You need, if you imagine the targets are still round in F-class even though you're shooting at paper. The X-ring at 1,000 metres is 5 inches, which is fairly small. And if you imagine on a circle you draw a cross through it, if your vertical spread is 2 inches wide, so 1 inch above and 1 inch below the crosshair or the horizontal crosshair, you've got far more target available to you than if you have a 4 inch spread. Once you start getting those extremities, that becomes a 6 as opposed to an X, because you've got that vertical dispersion. So yeah, and as opposed to my requirements for an PRS gun, there's lots of differing opinions out there. I know a lot of people chase the similar sort of accuracy, but my personal rule is if I get a load that shoots half inch at 100 metres or better, I'm done. I stop load development and I start shooting. Off of a barricade, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're shooting a quarter and a half inch group in my book, because unless you can get your wobble down to 0, that's not going to be the deciding factor. The group size is going to be how much your wobble is.
Yeah, totally. So get rounds loaded and get practicing the positional stuff, and that's what everyone says.
There is no point having a quarter-minute gun or a one-hole gun. That's the dream. If you only ever shoot paper at 100 metres and you never get out and practice, you're not going to go real well when the competition kicks off. So that's and then the other thing is barrel life. Take into account as well. I can usually get a half-inch group going within about 40 to 50 rounds normally, and then to get that ultimate sort of quarter or less group at 100 metres. And you could use 200-300 rounds getting to that point. And then, I run a 6 Creed. My barrel life is 1,500 to 2,000 rounds. So you've just used, a significant portion of your barrel life getting this group. So that's why I've just drawn a line in the sand and said, that'll do. Start shooting.
Mm-hmm. A question I had for you that, because I've just loaded up some rounds tonight as well as you're doing, and just gone down into the paddock to confirm my 0. How often are you checking 0? Because that's something that surprised me so much starting competition shooting and starting reloading is like those small variances in your lot to lot numbers in maybe a different batch of projectiles or a different batch of brass or once fired brass versus virgin brass, just how that zero does move around a little bit. And also that can be to do with the day. You know, you got a lot of mirage or you got a little bit of wind or no wind. How often are you confirming zero, or do you get your load ready, get your zero sorted and then don't touch it? Or will you go and check it tomorrow morning at the club before the match starts?
That's a really good question that you're asking. And I'd be interested to hear 10 people's opinion. So I would normally, at a club match, I'd normally shoot down to the 100-meter range. I always make my first shot of the day a shot at 500 meters, the smallest KYL target. That's just a habit I get into. I try to make a cold ball hit on a small target. So I make a decision to make a wind call and see if I can get a hit. It's just a bit of a thing that I do as opposed to just starting shooting paper at 100 meters. But yeah, just one shot. See what it's doing on the club day. I'd probably go down on paper, put 2-3 shots down if it's going where I expect it to. I wouldn't make a change. And now gets the tricky bit is if it's not going exactly where you think it is or like where it should be. I've been called out on I don't know how many occasions till I learnt don't change your wind zero based off of a couple of shots, rush at the range or something like that. I'd done that quite a few times until I learnt where it's 0.3 to the left. That's a bit interesting. Or 0.3 high. That's a bit weird. Pull it over. You start shooting the match, and you're like, I can't hit. It's weird. It's just not like my wind calls aren't lining up, or I'm not hitting things that I should be hitting. And then you go back to the zero board and punch 3 rounds down, and what do you know? They're shooting, 0.3 off to the side or something, 0.3 low or something like that on your adjustment.
Yeah, and that's exactly where it would have been centre hits if you had just left it.
Correct. So it's a tricky question, and I don't know that I've got a straight answer for you.
Yeah, I think it a lot of it probably comes down to how much time you have, really, doesn't it? Like if you were super prepared and you had all your ammo loaded and you were a week out from a match, you could organise to check throughout the week and confirm it and then be happy going into the match. But so often you're rolling in underprepared, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even you say there that you check, let's say you've got a match on at Buchan over in Victoria, and you're over here in South Australia shooting. It's 12 degrees or something like that. Head over to Buchan and you've checked your zeros over here and you've done everything and it's great. You go to Buchan and it's -2. Your zero could be slightly different depending on your sensitivity to powder and stuff like that. So you can't always take what it's doing at your local range or your backyard or whatever for what it's going to be doing out at a different location. Different DA, different everything. Temperature change of powder could be, although ADI powders are pretty temperature stable, they still have a variance.
I've noticed that I've been caught out a little bit since I'd never shot at distance really until I started doing this. I didn't realize how much mirage comes into it and how much that really, like the image, what you're seeing shifting around, and you start thinking your data's wrong or you start thinking your loads are, something's changed, but really you're just seeing that target in a different place because of the mirage. And I've noticed it at my range here on the farm. I've got a lot of bare, dry ground underneath my range and it gets so much heat off it during the day. And there'll be days where I'll lie down and can't even really see the 100-meter target. Like it's all blurry. And I was chasing that, the zero or trying to change things. And then, like you said, I learnt to identify that, okay, if the conditions are not right, there's no point me playing with the gun, because if I'm not seeing the target clearly and the mirage is affecting it, like I'm just guessing at that point.
Absolutely. And that comes back to that whole thing we're talking about, making a change off of a small sample size. I think people are too quick to blame equipment for not hitting targets when the first thing you should be looking at is you. More often than not, nothing has changed. With the equipment, it is something like mirage, or the wind's coming from a weird direction, or you've got the wrong DA in your Kestrel, or you've chosen the wrong profile, or something along those lines. I think those sorts of things happen way more often than the actual you've got too much powder in the case, or the bullet's going faster, or you put impacts just randomly change. It's more often than not that at all.
Yep. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that, and that comes down to experience and then trusting your equipment and questioning yourself first.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I do. If I have a bad stage or I miss something, I'm like, oh, that's weird, and then more often than not, I break it down after I finish shooting or something like that. I'm like, what did I do? And you run through your head and you're like, oh yeah, that was me. It's usually me.
Yeah. What are you reloading up there? Give us a bit of a rundown. I know I enjoy it, and I know a lot of other people enjoy too, hearing what other shooters' loads and cartridges and things are that they're loading for. What are you actually loading up today, and what are your components to make those rounds?
Yeah, so I'm my comp gun at the moment is a 6mm Creedmoor. So I'm loading those up for tomorrow. What do? I use Lapua brass almost exclusively. I've had a fantastic run with the lap brass over the years. I've been using it for maybe 10 odd years, and I don't think I've ever had a failure on the brass. It's been super reliable and it's super consistent. It doesn't need much case prep. Straight out of the box, usually it's pretty good. I don't neck turn anymore. I used to neck turn when I shot F-class. So turning the case neck, removing brass so it's consistent all the way around. I used to do that once upon a time, but the cool brass is super consistent with neck thickness. You might find a half a thou variance, which I haven't seen any. I don't know, say feedback, for want of a better word, to say that that's making a difference. So I'm happy with that straight out of the box. Shooting PRS, the brass prep is such a big thing, and you lose brass. It'll break my heart if I neck turned all of my brass, and then I lost a piece. Like, everyone's seen Nick on the range looking for his 243 AI brass because it takes him quite some time to make it, and he's trying to give me back my brass, give me my brass.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, back to reloading. So yeah, I use that. I've had O'Neill. I'll just run you through my process if you like. From having dirty brass to getting loaded rounds.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I decap. So I just have a decapping die that punches the primer out. So I go through and do all of that. That's just on an old Lee press. That's the only job that does is decapping, because you get all sorts of like carbon and bits and pieces come out. And it's not particularly good on your reloading press. So decap everything. I clean the brass with a stainless steel tumbler, wet tumbler. So all the brass would go in the wet tumbler. Depending on my time frame, an hour will get the job done. 6 hours will get the brass looking like new again. I mix it with just water, a small amount, like a teaspoon of dishwashing liquid, and a teaspoon of citric acid, and the brass comes out looking pretty much like new. Primal pockets are spotless. It's inside and extra clean. It does a really, really good job. And then comes out, brass will go into a food dehydrator, big food dehydrator, and usually goes in there for about 10 hours. And then obviously there's no moisture left at that point. Then I do resize, so I full length resize every time. That's one of the differences that we would have with the F-class guys. A lot of those guys will neck size probably 3, 4, 5 firings in a row before they actually full length size. But if they need a hammer to close their bolt, it's not a problem. But we can't have that. In PRS, you need rounds that feed consistently. We could be shooting in the mud like over at Little River last year. It was horrible. So you just need cases got a little bit of clearance in case you get a bit of junk in there. Even at our range at Monado in summertime, you'll get sand in your chamber. As much as you don't want to, you do. Full-length resizing makes that.
How far are you aiming to bump the shoulder? What's your sort of window that you're trying to bump that shoulder back?
The absolute minimum I can. So I use Reading, pretty much exclusively Reading dies. Most of them are all the competition dies with the bushing. So you got an adjustable bushing, well, adjustable, it's an interchangeable bushing that comes up in 1 hour increments. So you can control how much tension you put on your brass on the necks. But yeah, so I'll essentially have a piece of brass. I'll set the die so it's basically the case is just touching. It's not really doing anything. But I use the competition shell holders, so you can adjust how much. They come in 2 hour increments. So like the shell holder that goes in your press, you get 5 of them in a set, and each of them is 2 hour increment bigger than the last. And then I'll start with one of those and size it. So you're putting 2 hour on it, roughly, depending on your setup. And then I'll chamber the piece of brass into the rifle, close the bolt, and I'm looking for no resistance, or very little resistance. So it's not about a number for me. I don't just set it up and say I have to do 3 thou. That doesn't mean anything to me. It's all about how it feels in the chamber when you close the bolt. So if that means I need to go another increment, another 2 thou, that's what I do. Test it, and if I'm feeling if I feel any resistance after the first go, bump it back a little bit more, and then I'd try it again. And if that's smooth and chambers nicely, then I'm done. That's my setting. I put all my other shell holders away, and that shell holder then just lives with that die. So that's that. I use a sizing wax. A couple of different people make it. I think Reading make it, and I forget who makes the other one. Anyway, you can get sizing wax. A little tin. Oh, geez, it's tiny. It's like a shoe polish tin, smaller. That'll last you a couple of years.
Yeah, I think I use something similar. Hornady has a unique case lube, which is similar. You just dip your fingers in it like a wax and rub it on your fingers. There's a similar sort of thing.
That's exactly the one. Yeah, once you get it in your fingers, you really need to put on every second or third case. You don't need to put on every one. I use that. So once they're done, I'll throw them back in the. Actually, I didn't even talk about full length sizing. They're not sizing. Sorry, trimming cases. So I'll full length size, bump it back a couple of hours, whatever it takes. Then I'll check. This is a bit of a depends moment. For a club match where I'm not too fussed, and I know that I probably check on average the size of the casing for trimming, the cases for trimming probably every 3 firings, something like that. But for a club match, I'm not usually super stressed about it. But if it's a bigger match like a PRS match, all of my brass will get checked after it's full length sized, and it'll be trimmed back to the same length. So I got everything's uniform. It's a time thing. I'd love to do it every single firing, but I don't have the time to do that. I've got a Wilson micrometer case trimmer. It also deburrs as well. Separate tool head, but yeah, so trim it to length, deburr and chamfer. Then it'll go back in the tumbler again. No pins this time. I usually just put a tiny bit of dishwashing liquid in, a tiny bit of citric in there. Give it a spin for 20 minutes just to get rid of the wax. And actually comes back in the dehydrator again. Another 10 hours. So I need about 3 nights to do case prep because it works. Usually, as long as I start on a Wednesday night, I'm pretty good for a Saturday shoot. So then that comes out. I prime. My cases get primed. I use a 21st century priming tool. It's a little bit slow. You essentially feed a single primer in there, and then you seed it. But the beauty of it is the seeding depth is adjustable in, I think it's 10 hour increments. So you can actually play around with how deep you want to put your primers into the primer pocket.
That's like a lot more technical. I'm just using a hand primer at the moment, and it's basically like squeeze it until the primer stops, and then that's your depth.
Yeah, it's all about, everything's about consistency. Everything you do, and I did it that way for a long time and had good results. And over time, I've started to standardise everything so I know it's the same every time. So then, yeah, it just helps with your ES. I get loaded rounds, just cut it down a little bit, and which which equals what you would call waterline at distance, so your horizontal spread. The less ES you've got, the better your horizontal spread's going to be and the more targets you're going to hit. So yeah, that prime.
What primers are you running at the moment?
Most of my stuff I use small rifle primer cases like brass. I don't know if there's anything to it, but I've always had better case life out of having the small primer brass. The stuff I'm loading at the moment, I worked out the other day, I think this is about the 18th firing or something like that.
Yeah, wow. And you're obviously annealing every firing to get that kind of life?
I definitely left out the annealing bit. Yeah,
No.
I definitely.
Don't worry, I was gonna ask it because I'm in the market to buy myself an annealing machine with a mate at the moment. So I'm curious how many people do it.
Yeah, I do it every time. So the reason that I do that, so I would just to go back on my process. So I decap and then I clean in the wet pin tumbler, and then it actually, after it's dried, it goes on the annealer, and then it gets sized and off we go again. The reason I do that is one, because of tension, getting equal tension on the brass is nice and malleable. Annealed, it's not hardened, work hardened, and doesn't spring so bad. Something the brass does after it fires, after multiple firings and you're sizing it and stuff, it actually starts to get harder and it develops almost like a memory. And so you size it and it springs back and it doesn't actually size as much as you want it to. So annealing helps with that. But the reason I do it every time is I don't worry about batching my brass. So some people will batch it into 1 times fired, 2 times fired, 3 times fired, etc., etc. But with PRS, I found that was a bit of a pain, because you go to a match, the round count was 60 rounds, and then you'd only get off 55 rounds, and you go home with 5, and then you're like, I need more brass next time, and you're like, I've got 5 left, and if you haven't got somewhere to shoot them off or something like that, you end up getting all these bits and pieces that are left over that have got different batch numbers, and it just gets too confusing. So I anneal every time, and I don't care about how many firings it's got. All of my brasses, they'd be within probably 2 or 3 firings I run a batch. This particular brass, I've got 300 pieces. So that was the reason I annealed, and it just seems to work for me anyway. Now powder throwing. Beginning of last year, I upgraded from a set of the RCBS Charge Masters to an auto trickler, splashed out with the A&D scales.
Yeah, nice.
And it's worked out really well. It's really quick and super accurate. So it weighs down to the individual kernel of powder, which is pretty impressive.
You and Rusty did a video on that, didn't you? Put it up on YouTube with the A&D versus the Hornady unit, auto charge unit, and it looks like a very impressive unit you've got yourself there, mate. I'm a little bit jealous, and I'm probably going to save up for one myself.
You definitely should. It's one of those things that you'll have forever. I very much subscribe to the buy once, cry once theory. And just, if it's what you want, it's what your heart's set on, just save until you get there and buy it, and you'll have it forever and you'll never regret it. But yeah, I can get 3 to 4. I reckon I can get about usually 3 to 4 rounds a minute out of it, down to the kernel.
Yeah, wow.
And I actually did a fairly decent comparison on the Charge Master scales I had, the RCBS ones, and they were pretty good. I reckon over 50 shots, I had an ES of 0.2 grains.
Mm-hmm.
That was over 50. And then I worked out if you trickled up, if you set it, say you're going for 40 grains of powder, if you set it for 39.7, and then trickled your powder up with a hand trickler, that ended up, I could get my ES down to, I think it was just over 0.1, which is actually not bad. But that was quite time consuming to get to that point. This is just a speed and convenience thing for me. no, it's a good piece of kit. I recommend it to anybody that's thinking about do it. You won't regret it.
Yeah, well, I'm currently just throwing powder with a hand thrower and then trickling up on a beam scale. So absolutely anything would be faster than what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah. It's actually an incredibly accurate way of throwing powder. You'll find that'll be, if you've done a little bit of tuning on those, you'll find that they'll be very, very accurate. But it just comes at the cost of time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I reckon up until recently, Travis Harris was doing that, and he had great success doing that. I was going to say, I think he's finished top 10 at all of the PRSs he's shot in.
Yeah, wow.
From memory, he's done very well with a limited reloading setup.
Yeah, it's definitely possible, and that's sort of something we've wanted to encourage people with this podcast is, like, if you've got some stuff, if you've got a bit of kit lying around, or your dad's old gear, because I'm using my dad's old beam scale at the moment that had dust on it from 30 years ago. Like, you just get in and use it, because you're right. Like, you can use older equipment. You don't have to have the latest and greatest to make good ammo. And like you're saying, really, the only thing you're achieving with your more premium setup is you're controlling that consistency, and you're giving yourself that peace of mind to know that it's going to be the same every single time. So you're not going to have to chase your tail as much, and you're speeding your process up a lot, which is big for you because you're loading a lot of ammo. But I'm sure you could use a beam scale and a hand thrower and some of the older stuff and still make rounds close to sort of what you're making now. Just like you said, cost of time.
Well, exactly. It's all about time. If you want more time, you're going to pay for it. And yeah, look, then that's the whole, it's another subject. Well, it's not this subject because it's reloading related, but you could go down this rabbit hole for quite a while. Is depending on what you're aiming for. Like, I use the Scott Sadley method for load development, which is it's kind of modified, but essentially you pick a seeding depth and you load up charge about 18 to 20 charge weights in about 0.3 grain increments, depending on the case capacity, and you shoot them over a chronograph, looking at flat spots. Say that you can do it at distance. You can do it at 100 meters, but it's better at distance. You're looking for a flat spot in point of impact and measured velocity on your chronograph, and you'll find that we call it a node, like a point where the barrel's in like a stable state of harmonics. And you'll find that you'll get 3, maybe 4 shots that are very similar for elevation, for point of impact, and very similar, within maybe 8 or 10 feet per second for velocity. And the theory is once you load those up, you've got maybe 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 grains, maybe even 0.5 of a grain either side of your set charge weight, that it doesn't really matter 100% if you're out a little bit, because it's still got a similar point of impact or the same point of impact. So do you really need that level of accuracy to measure down to the kernel? Potentially not, but for me, it eliminates a variable. And what it ends up being usually is it's me is the problem and not anything else.
That raises a question that I was going to ask someone at some point on here. I guess I may as well ask it now. So I've already spoken with Rusty and Andy and some other people, and I've spoken myself about the finding the flat spot, finding the node in your velocity charges as you do the ladder test. I use a very similar load development process. I was wondering how were you finding those nodes and those flat spots pre-chronographs, or if someone doesn't have a chronograph or they don't have access to someone who has one, and you still want to sort of do that ladder test to find that perfect charge where things taper off and you've got that sweet spot where you can throw a bit more powder, a bit less, and it's still in that node. How are you finding that without a chronograph?
Well, you can do it I did it back when I was shooting F-class. We'd put a target up at 500 meters, pick the flat spot in similar point of impact on a horizontal line, and then we would go, okay, that's a node based on other people's experience, and then load up some charge weights at different seeding depths and shoot for groups and see which group was the best out of that same charge weight, and then you might get access to a chronograph and see what it's doing. So you can do it all on paper.
So you just need distance and paper to be able to gather the data, and probably a few more rounds, right? Because you rather than one shot per charge weight, you've got to take a couple to sort of see where they're grouping.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that is I've actually done that exact test without actually shooting into paper at all. So just measuring the velocity. So coming into, I think it was the buck and shoot year before, I changed projectiles. I was having some dramas with the ones I was using. They were I shot on paper for the first time in a while and realised it was shooting a 2-inch group at 100 metres and couldn't make them work. So I changed projectiles and the problem went away. But I didn't have time to get to the range, and I needed to make a change. So I went to a property that I could shoot on and put 20 rounds through the rifle straight into the dirt 10 metres in front of me, maybe a little bit further than that, but it wasn't much. Measured the velocity, found the flat spots, and then managed to get out and shoot a couple of groups, and it was shooting, under half-inch groups. And that was done without actually shooting on paper. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it all the time, but I didn't have a choice, and it worked out. Not a problem at all.
Yeah, okay. Yep. And people are doing, well, I've sort of done the same thing, and I think Scott Satterley is now a really big advocate for it as well, is doing that same ladder test once you've got your powder charge with your seating depth. So you're finding those nodes in the seating depth where you've got that, there might be a sweet spot at, let's say, 15 thou off the land's jump, but then 20 might suck and 10 might suck. So then let's go, 50 shot well and 40, anywhere from 40 thou jump through to 60 thou jump also shot well. Then that flat spot in the bullet jump is also really good. Is that something you're testing as well?
Yeah, definitely. So once I've got my, let's just say 40 grains is the flat spot, the node that I'm looking for in velocity, then I'll start playing with seating depth and shoot groups. So much the same thing. So I usually go in 20 thou increments, maybe 30 thou depending. And you're looking to see how wide the band is, which is exactly what you just explained. That group shoots great, but what if there's only 5 thou either side where it shoots great? Like your throat's probably going to erode 5 thou over a period of a PRS weekend. So if you've got a 30 thou wide band that starts at 40 and ends at 70, you're gonna load it up at 40 or 45, somewhere around there, and then you've got 20, 30 thou throat erosion before you might need to take a look at it again.
Yeah. No, that's sort of what I've been finding as well, and what I'm seeing a lot of people are moving towards. That's maybe different that we're doing in PRS versus the bench rest and the F-class guys. They're probably they're shooting less rounds. Their round counts are lower, so they can afford to be in that sort of premium spot, maybe closer to the lands. But then they're rechecking it, they're retesting it all the time, and they're moving that jump around. Whereas we just got to kind of have something that's going to, like you said, we shoot 100 rounds or 200 rounds in a national weekend. You got to have something that's going to work across a broader spectrum of time of the barrel and the throat moving. And so, no, I'm glad we're on the same page there, because I thought I knew what I was doing, and now you've just confirmed it.
Well, it depends if I know what I'm doing. I don't know that.
Yeah.
100%. Look, then that's where I say I can, between 40 and 50 rounds, I can usually get a load developed. I usually walking through my barrel breaking process, I guess. I'll usually just clean the barrel, come from the gunsmith, get any oil or any swarf or anything out that's in there. I'll usually fire one round and clean it, fire 5 rounds and clean it, and then I won't clean it probably for another 500 rounds after that. But yeah, so 1 round, 5 rounds ish, and then I'll start a ladder test at that point. So 6 rounds in, I'll start a ladder test, about 20 rounds, to about 26 in, and then usually I'll have 4 or 5 shot groups after that. So you're to about 46 rounds, and usually quite often I'll find something after that. 5-shotter, and then once I've found where I'm at, I'll generally do a 10-shot group of the load that I'm looking at. If it works, I'm certain I'm good to go.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. That sort of leads me into something that I wanted to ask you, like coming into this conversation. I was going to ask you about, how do you go about choosing your components? So for you, like when you've got a new, let's say a new rifle or a new cartridge that you haven't, loaded for before, how do you go, like, that's the powder I want to try, obviously you said you're set with your Lapua brass, but like that's the powder, that's the primer, that's the projectile that I want to choose. What criteria does that have to meet for you to go, that's what I want? Because I know for a lot of new shooters coming in, there's so many options and there's so many different projectiles. I bought 500 projectiles that I couldn't get a load for. It could have been my inadequacy as a reloader, but I couldn't get those to shoot, and then went and moved to something else and got them to shoot with no dramas at all. So then I had heaps of projectiles left over that I was like, well, what am I going to do with these? I couldn't get them to shoot. So I sort of made that mistake there. But for you, how do you make that decision?
That's a really good question. Experience and lots of lessons learned. Essentially, so I shoot pretty much. So you come down to, let's start with the beginning. So primers, I use pretty much all CCI stuff. I use BR4s, so the Bentress 4s, for all of my competition stuff, all of the small rifle stuff, even a hunting load. I just buy them by the 1,000 and just forget about it. I've only got one. I can't put the wrong one in. And I've never felt the need to change on those. They've been working well for me. I only shoot ADI powders. And then generally there's a couple of really good sources of information that I'll probably three main ones that I use. So Brian Litz, I like his fact-based sort of reporting or testing. It gives you a lot of good information. So his books, his books are well worth reading. I use it's a website called 6mmBR.com, the American site. They have what's called a daily bulletin, and they have news stories. It's mostly aimed at F-class and Ventresses, but they have lots of articles on reloading and all that sort of stuff. So I look on that site almost every day and read their articles. And then the other one is the Precision Rifle blog. They do probably every month or so. They usually do an article on what the pros use, and they focus on a different powder or a primer or projectiles or as a whole what they're shooting, and really go into depth. They do stuff on seeding depth tests, all sorts of stuff. So it's a brilliant source of information. So those sorts of things. And I'm not one of these people that I need to be doing something different. If I see that everybody's using 2209 with Berger hybrids in a 6mm Creed, like, call them in. It's working for everybody else. I'll make it work for me. I don't need to be doing something different for whatever reason. I just want it to work. That's one variable I don't have to worry about. But so far as your question about projectile selection and stuff like that, it kind of depends on the end game. If you're building a competition rifle, you can give some loaded dummy rounds with your projectile of choice to your gunsmith. And, you've done some reading and you've decided that lots of people have had good success with this particular projectile at 40 thou jump to the land. So you can give them your dummy round, say, well, these fit in my magazine. I'm happy with them. Give them to you. You usually give 3 to your gunsmith and say, can you please give me 40 thou jump to the lands based on this projectile? And then they can set your chamber up for your requirement, and you're already ahead of the game. You're already ahead of the game at that point. So, as an example, like I've just ordered a reamer from the States that should be here next week for my new barrel that I hopefully get screwed on before the new season kicks off at Monado. And I had that spec'd up around a projectile. So I decided that I usually shoot the Berger 105 hybrids, and I've decided that I want to shoot the 109 hybrids, the newer ones that are they're pointed, so they're a bit more consistent, a bit higher BC. So I've done a whole bunch of measurements off of that and decided, what spec of reamer I want. And I've had that. That should almost be in the post now, so it should be here next week, hopefully. So yeah, if that's going back to my original point about depends what you're using it for, my competition gun is built around a projectile, essentially. So that's the only thing I'll use it for. And it's only a competition gun. But if you want that to be a spotlighting gun, like Berger 109s or 105 hybrids aren't going to work that well.
No, so you need something lighter that's going to work for that, and then that's a whole different load development,
right.
isn't it?
Yeah, you'll find that the free ball you're looking for on a Berger projectile versus a Hornady projectile is going to be totally different. So if you build it, you build your chamber around what a Berger projectile is gonna like. And then you want to go shoot Hornady projectiles through it, you're going to struggle a little bit. So you sort of need to, it really helps to know what you want to do with it before you start. But yeah, the best thing, like, Rusty sells the sample packs, which is really handy through Projectile Warehouse.
Yeah, and you can just buy those small batches and give them a go.
Yeah, that's right. So you can buy one or two lots of 20 and you're not overcommitted if it doesn't work for you, which is also another really good way of doing it. But the biggest suggestion I can make to people is go to the range, go to a reliable internet source, not necessarily just a forum, because we all know what people say on the internet. But yeah, go to a trusted source, see what everybody else is using, and if they're making it work, it's a fair chance that you can make it work. Don't get hung up on doing something differently to everybody else. That'd be my suggestion.
That's solid advice, and I mean I know it is such a broad question because, like you said, if you're hunting, then it comes down to what game are you hunting. So then you've got different projectiles for varmint hunting versus thick-skinned game, versus game at close range, game at distance. So I know it's kind of a broad question, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. That you've got to be conscious of what is what's going to work in your specific platform. Because I got caught out with that. I wanted to run the Berger 144 long range hybrids, which is what you're like, basically the bigger brother of what you're going to be running in the 109. Not knowing that I'm just shooting a factory Hauer at the moment, and the Hauers have quite a long free bore. They're quite a big free bore for a factory rifle, and so there's a lot of jump there. And with my mag length, the closest I could get them to the lands was like 90 thou or something to be able to, while being loaded within the mag. And I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything from sort of 90 thou back through to 150. I couldn't personally get them to work in my gun. Now, I'm not saying anything against Hauer or Berger, because someone else may be able to get it to work. But for me, that much jump wasn't working with that projectile. And then when I switched to the Hornady, I was able to load them at 70 thou jump, and those things just shot lights out. Like it was so easy to load for. It had such a big node, and that was working really well. And so that was me not doing enough research. Those 144s are such a long projectile that to fit them in a mag, they're seated quite deep, and the ogive is a long way away from the lands. And that was just, I didn't have the experience to know that going in that could potentially be a problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've actually, more recently in the last 12 to 18 months, there's a whole lot of data come out about longer jump, again, even longer than 90 at times, being people having success with it. So that's an interesting one that I've started to pay attention to as well, to see what people are doing. There's actually a really, really good article on Precision Rifle Blog about seating depth, where they went through. It's really database. It's fantastic. They tested a whole bunch of, they tested I can't remember, but say 6mm Creed, 6.5 Creed, and 6BRs or something like that, all using from memory I think it was even different projectiles. And they started to track how the rifle shot with different seating depths. And around, I think it was from memory, around the 60 to 80,000 jump, there was different calibers, different projectiles. There was all a convergence towards shooting really well. It's a brilliant article, and you probably need to read it 2 or 3 times to understand it. Well, I did anyway. But it's really interesting reading, actually.
I think that article was by is that Mark Gordon from Short Action Customs that did that, or Short Action Precision, or whatever it is in the States?
I think Carl Zant wrote the article, but I think he based it on was it Mark? Yeah, he's from Short Action Customs, from his data from memory. Yeah, I think the two of them collaborated on it and sort of put it together. Yeah,
because he's the one that he was on the Modern Day Sniper podcast, and he was talking about this article, And I think from memory, they did a lot of testing with the Hornady 147 ELDM and a lot of testing with was it the Berger 105 or was it the 109?
I think you're right. I think it was the 105
Yeah,
then.
yeah. And I remember him saying quickly off the cuff as I was listening to the Modern Day Sniper Summit with Mark Gordon on there. He just sort of said it quickly, the 147, we found the sort of convergence point here. And then he quickly threw out there, and the 140, that probably preferred 70 thousandths. I remember him saying it. And I was like, well, that's where I'm starting. I heard him say that, and that's where I went and measured and started. And like, he was right. It just fully worked in my gun as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's that article. I'm pretty sure we're on the same page with that. That's a really good one for people to check out.
Yeah, definitely. It really was. It was a bit of an eye opener. There was a point where everyone thought Berger hybrids just shot him 20,000 to land. And then all of a sudden there's people making him work at 70 or 80 power. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, it's definitely not necessarily stuck in, there's only one way of achieving it. Other people are having good success. I think a good example I might have for you is I've got a ticker in ticker T3 and 300 Win Mag, and they've got a 1 in 11 twist barrel, which is a smidge slow for a 300 Win Mag, or for a 308 in general actually. And I went through this selection process where I've built it. It's got a carbon fibre stock. It's just got the standard varmint barrel on it, but it'll get swapped out for a approved carbon fibre at some point in the future. I thought, I'll see if I can make this varmint barrel work with some heavies, even though it's a bit slow twist. And I trawled through all of the specs and a whole bunch of projectiles, and I eventually found the Berger's got a 210 VLD hunting, which is got a really good VC, and it'll work in an 11 twist and come out stable. And I sort of started playing around with that and did a ladder test like I talked about. I loaded it. I think Berger recommended that you go about 50 thou jump, which I was able to get only by single feeding because tickers have short magazines. And I tried 50 thou, did a ladder test, found a node, and went and got 5 rounds, and the 5 rounds basically went through the same hole at 100 meters. It's frustratingly, it's the most accurate gun that I own, and I've put the least amount of effort into it. It gets no love. It doesn't get clean. I don't treat it nice. And it's just ridiculously accurate. But yeah, that was based, I was knowing things like your twist rate, what velocity you're aiming for, what velocity your rifle's capable of getting, are a couple of things to narrow down the availability of projectiles as well. Like obviously not all projectiles work in all barrels. And it's something to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sort of that I've seen a lot of the maybe more old school reloaders, or what I knew in the past sort of growing up before I even started reloading, is people would like swap too many variables. Like they'd try a projectile, throw it in there with some powder, not even knowing what the seating depth was, not knowing how much it was jumping to the lands. And then when it didn't shoot, they'd go, oh, well, let's change the charge weight, or let's change to a different powder, or maybe my gun just doesn't like this projectile. And they're just like variables going everywhere, where it's like if you do the initial research and you get maybe a sort of a type of projectile or a couple, and you have one powder and one primer and one sort of lot of brass, and you, like you said, you find the nodes and you find the seating depth that works. You can tune like pretty much anything, unless you're really far off, like you've chosen the wrong powder that's meant for a 223 and you're trying to load 300 Win Mag or something. Yeah, I think that's an important thing. Do that research, narrow those variables down, and really get to work on your process.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's a really interesting one with that. It's much like anything. Like when you're trying to, I'm a tradie. Well, once upon a time I used to work on the tools. I don't work on the tools anymore. But when you're fault finding, you're trying to find why this thing isn't working, and you'll make a change, and then it doesn't work. So you make another change, and then you test it, and you make another change and test it. Whereas if you change 3 things and then it works, you're like, oh, which one of those 3 things was it? I've got no idea. it just, do one thing at a time and validate it, and then do another thing and validate it, and then that's the best way to get that wealth of knowledge for the results, and then you can say, so I changed my seating depth and it got better, or I changed my primer and it got better, or I changed my charge weight or whatever, it got better. But if you change your charge weight, your primer, and your seating depth all at the same time, like, you've got no chance, absolutely no chance of figuring out what worked and what didn't work.
You're just peeing in the wind, really, aren't you? You're just kind of hoping that something lands.
Yeah, 100%. You need to be factual, and it needs to be logical, and for it to really work. No,
awesome, mate. No, look, dude, that's been such a good chat. Like, thanks for jumping on with me. It's been really good chatting. I think there's going to be something in there for a whole heap of people, and we'll probably, try and get you back on at some stage to maybe go a little bit more in depth on just one topic. I know I sort of want to work towards with the podcast having, where we just have, the same sort of length podcast. We have a 45-minute, an hour podcast just focusing on, like, let's say neck tension, or we just focus on seating depth, or we just focus on charge weight, and we just sort of go a bit more in depth. But this has been really informative for me. I've written things down and taken notes during this chat. So, mate, thanks heaps for jumping on. I guess good luck at the match tomorrow, mate. I'll hope that you've messed something up in your process tonight while talking to me, so that I can maybe get a little bit closer to your score.
Oh, come on! You don't want to beat someone on their worst day. You want to beat them on their best day, mate. Come on.
Yeah, me beating you on your best day is probably a little ways off. So I'll take what I can get at this point.
No, look, thanks for having me on. It's always good to get on and talk about guns. You can do it forever. But yeah, you're right. Getting into, like I play with, I play a lot with neck tension and things like that, inside and outside neck tension and stuff along those lines. All of those things. There's probably 4 or 5 topics there on reloading that you could easily talk on an hour about each of them. We've touched on a lot of things tonight without going into a lot of detail. So there's definitely some more we could talk about.
Yeah, mate. Well, I know you've got a heavily pregnant wife who's about to pop for baby number 2 with you. So maybe once things settle back down again after that, we'll have you back on to dive into one of those subjects.
Yeah, for sure, mate. I'd enjoy it.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thanks heaps, Plushy, mate. We'll wrap that up here, but cheers for jumping on.
No worries at all, buddy. See you tomorrow.
Cheers, mate. Catch ya. Thanks for listening to another episode of From the Bench. This is supported by Projectile Warehouse, so get over and check out their webpage and have a look at the YouTube videos we're also putting up for Projectile Warehouse, and support those guys because they make this possible. Thank you.